Welcome to the Career Pathways Podcast. Hello, I'm Pat Lynch. Along with me, as usual, are my two teammates.
Gavin Brunson.
And
Can't really hear me over here, but I'm Jayson.
way back with the soundboard, making the magic happen, Jason Nichols, as always, as we fondly call him, Producer Jason. Today, in the Career Pathways Podcast, we have Dr. James Martell, Associate Professor of English and Dramatic Studies.
It's kind of French. It's mostly like French and comparative literature, something like that.
Okay, so I started out and I already got it completely wrong. But nevertheless, this is going to be a really great podcast because we got a fascinating individual here with Dr. Martell. Start us out, kind of tell us a little about yourself, like kind of your life story, if you will.
Oh boy, that's gonna take more than 1 hour.
We got time.
Well, so I guess like I'm the product of a strange like geographical configuration, if you will. I'm from Mexico City, and Mexico being so close to the United States, like we always had like this relation to the U.S. My mother lived in the U.S. as well for a while. So, and then in Mexico, kind of like the U.S. as well, we got this, at the beginning of the 20th century and 19th century, had a lot of immigration. So my family comes from like Spain and France and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Besides also like Native American and Native Mexican. So all of those kind of things played, I think, the role of me being here, in the sense that I learned English very young, at a very young age. And in Mexico, when you go to school, you have to, like many countries, you have to take English since you're a kid, right? And my school was particularly strong on that. It was like we had like an extra year of just English and so on. So I had like a pretty bilingual kind of education. And then the next language that you start learning after that would be French. But I didn't learn until later. I did after high school and so on, which I had terrible grades and I almost flunked everything because I was playing pool all the time and drinking beer. After that, when I got to college in Mexico is different than the US, right? Kind of like in Europe, like we don't have like majors and minors. Like that's kind of more like high school, where you have like these like majors and minors, and then also kind of areas. So like, say if you were gonna go to English, you will have like an English kind of like leaning concentration, very little common core.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get to college, that is like there's no common core. Like it's you do all. I did philosophy, so it was like all philosophy. There's a little like some electives, but they are related too. So mine were literature oriented. I've always been between philosophy and the literature. And yeah, I did that, and then after that, I wanted to come to the US, and my English wasn't that great at the time because it was rusty and I had no French. And I got offered to go and study Hispanic literature at the University of Kansas.
Hmm.
So I went there, and while I was doing the masters in Spanish or Hispanic literature and teaching Spanish as a way of paying for it, I learned French. So I just started like on my own and started learning French and so on. I was already working on French philosophy, so it was kind of easy to do that. And then after that, I had French. I was like, now I can go and do what I wanted, which was to do a comparative literature degree, right? And I got accepted in a couple of places. I ended up going to the University of Notre Dame, and then when I got there, I was like, oh, I'm gonna do mostly French. And my advisor, who you guys might know, at least you know the last name. He passed recently, Joe Bujigig.
Mm-hmm.
He's the father of Pete. Exactly.
Yeah.
He was a scholar of Gramsci, the Italian Marxist. And yeah, he was a fantastic guy. Like I really loved him. And he told me when I was like, oh, gonna focus on French. He's like, no, you should learn German. And I was like, but I want to practice. Yeah, no. And he sent me to Berlin, so I learned German there. And then I came back, and then comparative literature is, and this is to answer also when you said you were not wrong about my title. It's just that my title is changing right now.
Yes.
But when I came back, I had another professor who was like, "It's great that you work on all these languages, but since this is a career podcast, he said, but you're not gonna get a job. Nobody's gonna
Yeah.
hire you as a complete person. Those are very few jobs in the country, and they tend to be like only at like Ivy League, like
Mhm.
and they are like disappearing. This is not gonna happen. So he was like, you need to focus on French. Like you
Mhm.
need to really just like make your CV like I am a French professor, like
Mhm.
straightforward. So that's what I did. But it was hard to compete with people who didn't. Because my PhD was comparative literature, right? There are people with French like PhDs completely, so it was hard to compete with them. So when I saw the job here, it was very interesting because it was like teach most or like all of the French courses from little ones to the advanced ones, but to help with the Spanish program as well and with English.
Mhm.
So it kind of fit really well. So I applied and I got the interview, like the campus visit, and I don't know how much you guys have talked about like how the academic market, like how is the process, right? Like it's very long. Besides the applications and a big material and dossier thingy, you also have to like do like Zoom interviews and then like campus interviews and you know after all that I got the job, but then we had different changes uh, for our personnel here.
Mm.
We used to have two French faculty members, me and another person. So then we lost one of them. So I became the de facto like just French person. And also since I'm very interdisciplinary, I've taught classes cross-listed with philosophy, with art. So I was like, where do I fit better? Where can I help there better? So that's why like my title officially is still
Mhm.
professor of Romance language,
Yes.
but it's changing to something like professor of French and comparative literature because I teach so many classes in the English program as well,
Good.
and the film minor as well.
Goodness.
Yeah.
So with the English classes, what classes are those?
So usually the one that I help the most it will be our world literature, which is the one that Jason is in. I also like next semester I will teach. This will be the second time. I teach a creative writing workshop because I do write narratives as well. So I was asked to do that once, and I'm happy to do it again. I tend to cross list a lot of classes too,
Right.
right? Because I love my French students and I love teaching French, but the problem is if you say if you want to like take French, right? Like you take
Mhm.
like semester one, semester two, semester three, semester four. It wouldn't be until your third year that you are ready to take like an advanced class,
Mhm.
right?
Mm.
So the things that I teach a lot about gender studies. I teach a lot about philosophy and literature and so on. And I want for everybody to be able to benefit from that. Cinema. We want to have a horror film class, French for horror film class next semester. So I cross listed. So in a way that if you are a French major, you come to the class, you read in French. The class is in English, but you read in French, you write in French, and I correct all that. But then if you're an English major, or even like just any major, like doesn't matter what major you want to take a class on
Right.
French horror or French theory or like French novels, you can come to my class. So I cross list with English a lot. Depending on the exact class, it might be cross listed with special topics, which is the
Mhm.
most open. I've done that with like French feminism and French art. Or it could be like in the next year, I'm going to do one on French film theory. So it will be with a critical theory.
Mm.
So yeah, that's pretty much what I do. I'm a mutt in discipline, so yeah.
But it's a perfect fit for a college like Lyon, where so much, we liberal arts is just so far ranging and just the wider that the learning and instruction that you can receive, then it just helps in all all those areas, no matter what profession you choose, how to read, how to write, how to critically think, how to appreciate, and understand others and different points of view, and that, I mean, just all the different areas that you're covering is perfect for a place like mine.
Yeah, no, I think it works very well, and I think it's funny because throughout the 80s and 90s, like this thing called like comparative literature was very big, and you had many programs going on,
Right.
right? And they were distinguished from your French, your Italian, your German, like by language programs. But they like that kind of started disappearing. We also have in my field, we talk about the crisis of the humanities, and that's something that has to do with colleges focusing more on STEM, and that's a long history that we can talk about later, right? But the funny thing is, like, if you're a comparative literature, you would not be able to get a job usually because those jobs per se don't exist that well, unless it's Yale or Harvard. They actually will fit in a liberal arts college because here exactly, like, I can, I'm an expert on a particular field, obviously, like I'm an expert on two guys, Samuel Beckett, the writer, and Jacques Derrida, the thinker. So I've taught once here a class on Beckett. So those students benefited of like my maximum nerdiness, right? At that moment, right?
Right.
I would love to teach one on Jacques Derrida one day. I might be a little too complex, but at the same time, like, yes, like, something that is very exciting about this is that I get to learn, right? So like I see students, like when I taught the French feminism class was because I saw, like, students approached me. They were like, "Hey, do you work feminism?" And I was like, "A little bit." They were like, "Could you teach a class on it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can do that." And then so I learned through that, right? And that informs, like, I'm really big into research. Like I write books, I edit collections, and what students ask me to do, and their opinions, like, because they're young and fresh,
Right.
like they made me, like, see new points of view from different points of view, and they like enrich my own research. So it's kind of like very synergic again in that sense, and it fits really well. Again, paradoxically, right, for somebody who comes not from a discipline that is like, well, you're gonna do, like, I don't know, like inorganic chemistry, that's all you do, and like, don't you dare, switch lanes. So that is, yeah, I think it does fit really well.
I have to ask, French feminism, how would that class be taught, and how would that be different than feminism seen from an American perspective, or from some other parts of Europe or Asia?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is a tradition, right? Like that, and it's mostly that, right? It's like American tradition. I don't know actually that well the American tradition. I know it a little bit, but the French tradition is very strong in the 20th century, and that's my area, 20th century, right? So you got, like, mostly the first one will be like Simone de Beauvoir in the 40s, writing The Second Sex. That is kind of like the first wave, more or less, of French feminism. Very existential, like, based.
Simone de
De
Beauvoir?
Beauvoir, yeah.
Yeah.
She
Okay.
was the lover of Jean-Paul Sartre, which was like the center, right, of intellectual life. And then after that, in the 60s, just as in the US, you also have like a big tradition that begins with people like Hélène Cixous, who's still alive. And then you got other writers like Monique Wittig and so on. What happens that is interesting there is that the French are, in some ways they're very progressive, very liberal. In other ways, they're not, right? So when this French feminism start happening, they start influencing America, right?
Yeah.
But then, for example, when you talk about like lesbian feminism or like trans feminism, then they are a little more conservative.
Yeah.
So some of the thinkers from France actually came to the US. So they left France. Right. And then after that theory starts getting into the US, and you get people like Judith Butler and like queer theory, they start thinking about it there, then they go back to France.
Yeah.
Right. So then you have a new wave of thinkers in France. So that's how I did it. I did it with that. And then, right now, for example, the two, until a couple of years ago, it has changed a little bit, but the two most famous French writers, like if you talk about like numbers, like of the books, the authors that were bought the most, right, in France, were Virginie Despentes and a guy called Michel Houellebecq. Michel Houellebecq is very controversial guy. He's very interesting novels. He talks a lot about kind of like toxic masculinity and like cultural issues in France, especially with like Muslim population. He got in trouble right now because there was always kind of the feeling that he had some like bad political tendencies, but he was very quiet. Like he was like, no, it's like, it's a feeling. But it came out recently, so that finally, after so many years, like, burned him a little bit. But Virginie Despentes, she's one of those writers, like, not like, here in the US where you do like an MFA, and like there's not that tradition. It's more like, people who live, people who they might go to school for one thing or other, but it's not like you don't go to school per se, right? So she like was this young, smart person and started like I think she did a BA or something. But then after that, she actually she worked as a in sex work. She worked as a prostitute for a little bit, and then she wrote a novel about it. And that novel was very very successful. It was made into a movie, and then she kept writing, and she writes these like very interesting pieces, and she right now is like she's an author. She's been for many years an author. But that's like one of the most successful writers in France, right?
Mhm.
So you get to see this how feminism still plays a role in French culture strongly. And the last up to this year, last year's Nobel Prize of Literature was Annie Ernaux, who's French as well, and who's also a woman. Is the second woman, the first French woman who wins the Nobel Prize of Literature, and who deals also with the experience of of womanhood as a writer, right? So that's how I teach it. Like it's in French culture is feminism is kind of something that is always at
Yeah.
stake, right? It's even if you are not teaching a class on
Right.
feminism, it's gonna pop up
Yeah.
because of just the culture in general.
In France, are they experiencing the same level of culture wars like we have here in the United States in that area?
Oh God, that's a very interesting question. So yes and no, right? Well, it's different, right?
Yeah.
So the main thing that France goes through right now, and there was an attack, for example, 2 days ago. Nothing as bad as. Thankfully, France doesn't have as many guns as we do.
Yeah, it was a stabbing. Was
Yes,
that-
it was a
yeah.
stabbing and a hammering. To just to tell you a quick anecdote about like the difference in that term. I took some students to Marseille and Paris a couple of years ago, and they went out at night to have a beer and something, and then next morning they were like telling me like Dr. Martell, we saw a guy who got shot. And I was like, what? Yeah, we saw a guy who got shot. And I was like, no, that didn't happen. Like you probably saw somebody hurt, but
Yeah.
they didn't get shot. And they're like, why not? It's like, because there are no guns here.
Yeah. Right.
And literally we found the newspaper later, and he was I think he was fine. He got stabbed.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's kind of the thing. But to answer your question, like for example, France, if you look at Twitter, like French Twitter, which is what I work on sometimes, like what you see is more they're still struggling with the inheritance of their colonialism, right? And part of it was especially what they did in North Africa.
Right.
And part of it is that after their colonial pursuits and that finished, especially with Algeria, they granted citizenship to their citizens there, which was a good thing to do. But then France is a very, very secular society,
Mhm.
right? They were very Catholic for a long time, but they then became like part of their pride is being secular. So when you get population who are coming, like especially Muslim,
Right.
that makes them really nervous, right? So you get they're amazing, beautiful, like I'm one of those like all for like the integration of the Muslim population in France, and I lived in the banlieue, the suburbs, so like most of my neighbors were from different places. It was very cosmopolitan in that sense, especially from North Africa. But a lot of people, like the same as we have like white nationalism here in the US, you will have some kind of like
Yeah.
white fear of like, not only the other continental wise, but also like religious wise, right?
Yeah. Well, Marine Le Pen. Is
Oh,
that-
yes, Marine Le
yeah.
Pen, yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, but that's
Yeah.
It was kind of fringe, but then all of a sudden now she started getting a significant
Yeah.
following.
Yeah, I mean that's also part of the state of the world, right? Like when you get,
Right.
you can link it to Putin, you can link it to Orban in Hungary, right? The thing with France is that usually at the end, because they have like 2 rounds of elections, right? So at the beginning, there's like a lot of like, and they don't have 2 parties; they have many parties, right? So at the beginning, there's always like a lot of struggle, and then the left, there's like the Communist Party, there is like the very left, there is like the Green Party, and then they get really angry at each other. But then when like they count the votes and the second turn is gonna be Le Pen,
Right.
that scares the bejesus
Yeah.
out of everybody, right? So that's when they unite
Right,
and they're
right.
like, no,
Right.
no. But it's true. Le Pen, Marie is the daughter of the original Le Pen, who was at some point they're like the straightforward fascism,
Right.
right? And she's smart, and like right now, for example, with the war in Israel and Gaza in Palestine, like it's funny because she starts like leaning towards Israel and trying to defend Israel, but then her followers, a lot of them are anti-Semites, So it starts creating this like weird, like what is happening, right?
Right.
So the cultural wars, to answer your question, are different in that sense. They are similar up to a point, right? Like there's a fear of neo-fascism, neo-Nazism. Uh, there's also racism, there's also sexism, but at the same time, like for example, we are up to a point, right? We might be like we in the U.S. see ridiculous when people. I don't know if you guys remember the burkini. Like remember
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, where they about what Muslims were allowed to wear on beaches.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. So it's like swimsuit, but it covers the face,
Right.
like the burqa. And in France, at some point, they were making it illegal, and they were like taking it away from.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Why?
it's like to us sounds ridiculous, right?
Right.
But to them, and I'm not justifying it, I'm just following the
Right.
logic. To them is this secularization, right? Like if you go to school, any like religious symbol is forbidden,
Right.
right? Because what they're trying to do is, you know, the motto of the French Republic is like fraternité, égalité, right? So it's like to keep everybody equal, right? It's like, well, we go to school, we don't have any sign of distinction, we're all the same, right? So if anything religious starts popping up, they are like nervous about that, right?
Right.
And then you probably remember, I don't know if you guys remember, you're young, but like the Je suis Charlie, like the attack at the Charlie
Right.
Hebdo,
Yeah.
right? Like that's very strong in France. Like it's a very difficult thing, um, because obviously you want to be an open society, open culture. You also want to embrace like France thinks of themselves as universal, right? But then they also think that the freedom of expression, you know, it's a big question that is I'm not an expert, right? But like when does it trump um respect for a religion, right? So like the representation of Prophet Muhammad is what created the attack, right? So anyway, that's kind of like we're not gonna solve it today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But
You want
yeah,
to
please.
have a question?
Well, yeah, I guess that was a lot. But basically what like the process of becoming a professor and your journey through all of that. What stands out to you in all of that?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you. I'll tell you like I think I would have given you another answer usually, but I like now that I've thought about it, I thought about it more as you know I gotten old and seeing like how life changes. I'll tell you like the most difficult part about it is that we live still in a very anti-intellectual society, right? So we like it's not like our society is trying to like uh pay a lot of money to teachers or to professors or like open these things. It's like rather we see it as a thing that some people do, and that makes it that is scarce, right? Like sometimes professors will tell you to their students like, hey, you guys are lucky to be here and have this opportunity. And honestly, I like usually I used to think like, oh, that's just like a nice thing to say, but no, we are all really lucky. So that is the thing that I didn't know when I began this journey. I didn't know that that was gonna be the case because I come from Mexico, which has many problems in different ways, but we don't have a tradition of anti-intellectualism, right? Like, so we never see it as, like obviously, like we get angry at like rich people, like, hey, like we need more fairness and like pay us more and so on. But we never connect like, oh, it's the elites is the rich and the intellectual. We never connect that, right? To us, professors are. I remember like one of my favorite professors. Like I would look at his shoes and they were like very torn, right? Like I saw his clothes and he was a good university, but I never connected that with like, oh, you're a privileged person, right? So so getting a job right now for people like me, especially in the humanities, it's like winning the lottery because there are so few.
Yeah.
So few. And you have to specially fight for the right to learn things that are not only to get a job, but just to, as you were saying, like, become a critical thinker and think beyond things, right? So I when I tell students like you should learn French, right? Sometimes it's like, well, what job I'm gonna get? It's like that could help you get a job, but also because it's just gonna open your mind and your life to many things, right? So that is the biggest challenge. I'll say that is what I think for my friends who teach at like Ivy Leagues, to my friends who teach at like community college or high schools, like we all struggle with this like like uphill battle of like this is important, right? And we not that I obviously would love to be paid more. We all would do, but but just like being appreciated more as like the foundation of the society.
Right.
That's kind of what comes up to me as like the hardest thing, which translates in very I applied when I came to Lyon. I applied to 80 jobs that year, right? That was the third year that I applied. Right. And I know friends who, are adjuncts. I was not like, I don't know if you guys know the distinction about adjuncts. Like, more or less.
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
am.
There you go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
before I got this job, was an adjunct at 3 universities, and I had to commute to teach different places just to make, I think I was making maybe 16,000 a year to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did like from like college on? Was your goal always to be a professor, or did you entertain like other professions?
That's a great question. I I wanted to be a writer. That was my thing.
Well, and you are.
And I am
Yeah,
in some way,
yeah.
yeah. But I wanted to be like
Yeah.
Jayson, like a fiction writer. Like I wanted to be like to write novels and
Right.
and do that. I honestly like also was very like we all are sometimes like very naive. And I thought
Mhm.
I just get a job at a high school in Mexico, and I will just like
Yeah.
become a writer, and then one day become the new I don't know Octavio Paz, the famous Mexican
Mhm.
writer. But then like life like it was like okay, so if when I did my master's was like now you get a salary, right, which was like $12,000 a year, but you get a salary and you get out of your parents' house and you go to
Right.
another country. So I did like okay, I'll do that in the meantime. I'll keep writing. I also because I didn't do literature as an
Mhm.
undergraduate, I did philosophy. I started getting more and more into philosophy. And I discovered that I love literature, but I don't think I'm a great writer, like of literature.
Right.
Like
Right.
I'll teach you well, I promise. I'll try my best. But like I think I'm a better like theory writer. Like I think and my life has taken me the way I have been successful writing philosophy and theory is way bigger than the way I have been successful writing.
Right.
And also because it's just so difficult for me. Like I've written 3 novels and I like them, haven't published them all. But it's like it takes me a while. It's like it takes a lot of thinking, and it's just while I write books like of theory very very easily.
Mhm.
So that took me into becoming more of what we call a theory guy,
Right.
and yeah, but when I realized it, I was like my dad, he used to call me like his philosopher. That was like his title to me, and I think he was right. I was like I think that's what really got me, and I am pretty much yeah.
Oh, well.
Um, so throughout your journey,
Mhm.
out of everything that's you've absorbed, what is one lesson that has really impacted you and that you learned that really defined you and who you are and made you open your eyes and see, yeah, this is me?
Ooh, tough one. Ooh, man, that's a tough one. Okay, I can give you two. I can give you the one that I write in my like teaching statements when I have to do applications for things. The one that I write in my teaching statements is this one. It's this professor that I mentioned. We were taking a class with him on Hegel. He's like one of the most difficult philosophers ever, and our head was spinning. It was just very hard to understand, right? And it was about a concept called sense perception, which is how do you understand the objects in relation to your own subjectivity, and very complex thing. Anyway, a guy then in the middle, a student, just got fed up with it. He was like, "Hey, I just don't get it. Why are we learning this? This is useless. This is like blah." Right? Like I want to get a job. And this professor just said like he's like if you don't understand that at the end of the day, like all these difficult process, like all this understanding, like one of the most difficult concepts of philosophy, right, is for you just to open the question of why would you feel that you are a better person or a better subject because you are here at a university that somebody who cannot be here, right? Like if you cannot make that connection, he was like, I cannot help you. And to me, like mark me, that was like kind of like because I love the abstract world of ideas and it was very all cool. But when I understood, and I really respected this guy, I do. He's fantastic, and I saw how he was connecting it, like all of these, like the most abstract thoughts that you can have. At the end of the day, have to do with your how you conceive of your place in the world, right? Um, so that's the one that I mentioned in my cover letters, and the one that is more for myself that is related to this is that, and I have a tattoo of it, is that my tattoo says this. it comes from I'm a atheist agnostic, but it comes from a theologian, funny enough, and it says that there are those who will understand that their soul comes from outside, it's not to them, right? And to me, that's kind of like a big question. Like again, I'm not religious, right? So I don't conceive of a God. I conceive rather that what we call soul, or what I call soul, is like the kind of what you all do around me. Like what everybody does around me is what constitutes me and marks me. And that's the healthiest way for me to think of my own self, because that is what makes me care. That's what makes me like, like anything that I do, right? Like, or anything that we do, right? Like, what is it worth if it's just for ourselves, right? Like, Jayson is in one of my classes right now where we had the chance to talk to an author. We're going to have to talk to an author tomorrow. And she's a fiction writer, but writes a lot about horror up to a point. And she says, like, the scariest thing, the biggest monster, right, is to be alone, to be isolated, right? So to me, that is kind of the thing, like, like the lesson of, opening yourself to the other, which is scary as hell, right? but doing it truly and be like, because that's the only way of getting rid of the worst impulses that we have, right? Like racism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, any kind of phobia. Like it's this kind of getting rid of that fear of like, hey, like, we are not closed entities. We're all like kind of this fluxus thingy, right? So let's just like this. Let's do something cool and symbiotic and talk to each other and create something.
You mentioned tattoos.
Yes.
So yeah, we have now. Look, but yeah, your book Tattoo Bodies.
Yes.
Yeah, this is like you writing it as far as like more in theory about as far as the whole concept of body art and what it represents. So kind of how did you evolve there? Because father, you know, proud, father of a daughter that I had to kind of begrudgingly follow her through her tattoo journey.
Yeah.
First one, screaming, yelling. Second one, that kind of looks all right. Third, but can you stop there? Third one, fourth one, and so the story goes. But I finally had an appreciation for what she was trying to do, which was self-expression.
Yeah.
Where I just thought, oh, this is a mistake that's permanent. Goodness, but then I really grew to just, kind of embrace that. Okay, this is how she wants to express herself, and I started seeing body art very differently.
Yeah.
And be interested in your thoughts on that, because you've created a wonderful book on this and studied it a lot further than I ever have.
I mean, I think you have as much as I do in some way. Like, so just clarification, I didn't write that book alone. I co-edited that book.
All right.
So it does have an article from me.
Yes.
But again, talking with related to what I answered to your question, right? We're talking about here. It's a collective work, so it has scholars from I think one is in Saudi Arabia. We have one in the UK, one in Arkansas. We have different people doing, and we have also different disciplines.
Right.
I have anthropologists. I have literary scholars. I have a French professor at Brown. So it's different places. Just a clarification, right?
Perfect.
But so my chapter is very nerdy. It's very much in people who work on Derrida and Deleuze, particular authors, right? But what I saw is what you're saying, that is very important, right? Like it is about self-expression, right? And like there's one article there that I don't know the person like in person. She's an anthropologist, but I think it summarizes really well in relation to what you're saying, right? And her article is about, I really recommend you guys to read it. It's really interesting. It's about this group of nomads in around the Middle East. I forget exactly what area, right? But her article conjoins like their tattoo practice, which is dying, with climate change, or the climate crisis rather, and with like cultural things, because this group of nomads will for ages, they in their movements, right, they will run into gypsies, and the gypsies will give the women, just the women, tattoos. They'll be like, here you go. And so if you're a grandma, you will tell your daughter, and then they will have these tattoos, right? now because climate change, like that, the path that they go has pushed them more into Muslim communities. So they have been incorporated by Muslim communities, which, at least in that line, have a prohibition against tattoos.
Right.
Right. So they have stopped doing, right? So it's disappearing. So this document in this book is beautiful because and it has pictures. It talks about this disappearing tradition of female tattooing, right? Because it was also like female gypsies giving it to women. And what I love about it is that, yes, there are like deep meanings about the tattoos up to a point. Like it has to do with maps, it has to do with territories and lands and so on. But at the end, one of them is this old woman just says like, it's sad because they made me feel pretty. Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's like, I see students like in the US, I think we're way more accepting of tattoos than France.
Right.
In France, it's seen as like more like blue collar, low class. And I got some like discussions with my friends about it.
Yeah.
But
Well, my Father's Day was the drunk the
Yes.
drunk sailor.
Yes.
That went out for a night and came home with
exactly.
with
Yeah.
a
Well,
tattoo. Yeah.
my dad hated my tattoos. It was only until the end of his life at some point that he was like, they look cool. I was like, well, now I have my whole arm. Like, of course.
Can we? Would you be mind if could we see your sleeve?
Sure. I just have to like. Do this.
Ah!
For the video. No, it's fine.
All right.
The Matrix right there, though.
Like a,
Oh, wonderful.
there you go.
Ah!
There you go.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
So how did that progress?
Oh, so this one is so at some point I wanted to sleep. I was like, I want to sleep. Sleep is cool.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a painting. It's a copy of a painting by a guy called Valerio Dami that one of the guys I worked the most on, Jacques Derrida, which I have the signature around here.
Mm-hmm.
He made. So like this paint, I work a lot on. I'm very interested in the relation between images and text, right? Like work a lot on art and aesthetics. So this painter, he's still alive actually. He at some point read a text that is very important that I work on called Gla by Derrida, who passed 20 years ago, and he got inspired and made this painting, right? So Derrida had it at his house and so on, and it was just a painting. So when I wanted the sleeve, I was like, I'm just gonna print the painting, fold it, right, like around my arm, and get it there. So I went with a tattoo artist in Little Rock here. I don't know where he is. I don't think he's there anymore. But I went there and I was like, hey, he had done. I have a whale here that he had done. So I was like, I want this. And it's very funny to me because, we see tattoos as like a hip thing, like a. I wouldn't say liberal, but like at least a kind of like non-conservative. Like it's kind of like cool thing to do, right? Up to a point. And this guy had like tattoos all over his face. And he was like, I remember when I was like, okay, I want to do this now. And he's like, no. And I was like, yeah. I was like, why? Why not? And he's like, no. It's like, no, man. And I was like, why not? He's like, it's red. And I was like, so in my mind, I was like, is there like, I don't know, maybe there's more lead in the red one? Is there something particular about lead, like red paint that he's like, no. He's like, well, and then I understood what he meant. He's like, it's gonna be hard because you bleed. And when you're bleeding red, it's hard to cover it, right? Because it's like, I cannot see what I'm doing.
Right.
So I was like, at some point, I was like, well, I'm going to take my business someplace else. Like, you don't want, he's like, no, I fine, I'll do it. He wasn't that happy about it, but he did it. But like, what is funny to me there is that even though, he's very hip and had like tattoos everywhere and so on, he got really traditional there.
Yeah.
He was like, this is not a traditional tattoo. I do not appreciate this. Right. But yeah, so it's a painting, and usually the people really like, it calls the attention of people all over the world. I love that tattoos are like breaking the ice pieces. All around the world, I get people who like talk to me, like, well, they approach me because they see something interesting, and that opens a conversation sometimes, or they're just like, hey, cool thing, man, and that's it, and feels nice. But yeah, it's one of the authors I've been working on for 20 years. So it's, when you dedicate your life so much to something, it's very important. I like also it's a fish. So it's abstract, but you can see that there is a fish there, right? Because I like fishing, and I like the style, and I like the weirdness of it. So I've been thinking about doing something color-wise here too,
right?
But I also like things that are asymmetrical. So maybe I won't.
You're the. Go ahead, Jason.
Okay. I try to get one more. Uh,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
how they, what was has anybody ever gone?
Mhm.
Or is it, how is that?
So no for tattoo. I mean, Japan is very interesting, right? Because for them, especially I think since the 19th century, tattoos are a synonym of the mafia, of the yakuza,
Yeah.
right? But Japanese folks, and they were very kind when I went to Japan 2 years ago. I was there. I was lucky enough to be there for like 3 weeks. I was there in Tokyo, Osaka, and a tiny town. And even in a tiny town, they were all like very kind people, very very funny, and they tolerated my 3 words of Japanese. But I saw that they were like, I didn't feel like judged or discriminated at all. But I talked to them about it. At some point, I mentioned it, and one of them, this restaurateur of a tiny restaurant there in that tiny town, he was like, no, it's like it's cool because you are foreign. He's like, if you were not foreign, like if you were breaking the rules here, like then we'll have a different discussion. Then maybe we want, like, I don't know if they will. I never saw a sign says like no tattoos, but and I got a tattoo in Japan. Where is it? There it is. My little blowfish.
It's a blowfish.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
All
I love
right.
it so
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
He's so angry because they're gonna. I got it, and then I went and ate some. It was great.
Did that give you membership to the Yakuza?
I hope so.
Oh, there you go.
But but to answer, so no, I didn't have anything like. I mean, my brother hated my tattoos. But then when I became a scholar and I wrote a book about it, he's like, well, whatever.
Mhm.
Like my brother asked my wife, they're just like, don't do the face, just don't do the face.
Yeah.
But no, but I mean, like, what your question reminded me of something else, which is like I have not been discriminated for my tattoos in other cultures, but I do remember more like class discrimination. Like I enter a store, a hat store in Belgium, where I just entered the store. I was like you guys age, like I had like a hoodie, I was just like chilling, and the guy is like, and the guy like just nice like suit. He's like, excuse me, and I was like, oh, I'm just here. Look at the hat. He's like, do you have an appointment? And I was like, no, but the door says open. And he's like, get out.
Yeah.
And I was like, so anyway, not for the tattoos, but more because I look poor.
So, when you were getting your tattoos, did you have to worry anything about like position of the tattoos? 'Cause I think it's Japan. It's like the head of the dragon has to be faced a certain way or something like that. Or like, did you ever have to run into that where you had to do extensive research and be like, okay, let me make sure that I'm not like offending anybody? And
No. I mean, I don't know if you guys have watched Ink Master or any of those shows about tattoos, right? They do as this guy in Little Rock, like even though they look very hip and cool, they do have these traditions that are very I don't know if they're like, they have prohibitions because of like symbols. Like I have many stories there, but to go to one, right? Like for example, they will tell you like, oh, the face has to, face always like in or out. But I think that's more of a aesthetic thing that they, want to do. I have a friend who he has tattooed me quite a bit in Mexico. He's a good shout outs to Tenku. If he watches this video. Jose Valenza. And he once at one point in Mexico was tattooing with another guy, and I was there like looking at his things. And I saw that because you have the stencils sometimes, like that you will, if you're a tattoo artist, you will like put them on your wall to show what you have done, right? And this guy on his wall, at some point I saw a Nazi symbol. And I was like, no. I was like, I gave Tenku so much stuff. Like, I was like, dude, you don't. Like, he didn't do it. He wasn't my friend. But I was like, you tell your friend that is just not okay. Like, it's just not okay. Like, and I know that some tattoo artists will not. Like, they exactly, like, they won't do things that, like, talking more about disrespect, right? Like, they won't do things that are, like, disrespectful. But sadly, other ones would, right? Like, so it's I always talk to tattoo artists. I really like talking to them. One of the persons who wrote a chapter in that book is a tattoo artist as well. They have a very interesting, series of codes and cultural things, right? Um, but I think mostly, besides the silly ones of like a lot of tattoo artists want tattoo like names of couples. I'd be like, no,
Yeah.
really, it's never a good idea.
Yeah.
Or like they want tattoo you if you're drunk, right? Obviously, also another one. Besides that, like in general, like I think their struggle is more silly, which is like when people, especially first time tattoo
Right.
folks will come, they always want like something that is hyper significant. It's like, I want for this to mean this and this to mean this, which is interesting in terms of symbology, right? Like this and that. And they're like, okay, like, and it's a lot, and it's like, okay, how big do you want it? it's like
Yeah.
no, man, like it's not
A
gonna
very
happen.
quiet statement.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if that happens, it's gonna be your whole bag. So they have to always like push it. Like I think people are unrealistic sometimes. But yeah, no, about that, no. In I don't think there's that much of it. I think maybe the two artists are more like sometimes if they hear like the idea that they think is stupid, they'll be like, no, I'm not doing that.
Well, because it's you're going to be a billboard, or the person's going to be a billboard
Yeah.
for their art.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dramatic change of subject.
Okay.
Creative writing.
Yeah.
How do you teach creative writing? I've always wondered, as a as a professor, how do you approach like the beginning of the semester? And I want to teach. Are you teaching different styles, or a way of just trying to find that voice within you? I mean, what is your approach to teaching creative writing?
That's a great question. I think since so again, not an expert on this, but as I understand it and discuss it with my English faculty friends, like so in the US we have this MFA tradition, and for a long time that has been right. And it has marked American literature in I think in general, and again it's not my expertise, but in general, like you look at a successful writer in America, the chances of that person not having gone through an MFA are tiny, right? And that to me, besides I do like American literature, especially more like 20th and 19th century, but that always makes me nervous. Homogeneity always makes me nervous, right? So when I teach creative writing, I try to, not feel bad because I'm different, I come from a different place, but rather try to exploit it, right? So to me, it's a matter of like I want to teach and try to teach as much as I can the technicities of it. So it's like, okay, so obviously we can talk about setting, we can talk about characters, we can talk about dialogue, we can talk about things that are technical. But I'm a modernist. That's kind of like my period. And modernism is like just full of experimentation, like crazy experimentation, right? And I love that. I love things that break the mold. I love things that break rules, right? Obviously, not in just like a dada way, but in a smart way, right? So when I taught it once, and I'm gonna do it next time, I try to like see. It's kind of like when you're gonna cook something, right? Like you look at what you have in the fridge. And you're like, okay, so we have some mushrooms, we have some like heavy milk, we have some. What can we do, right? So I kind of look like that a little bit to my students. Like, what are they interested in, right? I like to give it kind of like a guideline. So like as I do with my world literature classes, that I give them themes like monsters or resistance or things like that. So last time I did was my guidance was Edgar Allan Poe. So I will make us read stories by Edgar Allan Poe as a parenthetical thing while they were writing their texts, right? So it will be like, okay, we write a text, we criticize it. That's kind of the regular structure of a
Turn out
workshop.
all the lights, couple dim candles.
That would be nice. That would be nice. But they just called me when I would turn in the incense in my office.
There you go.
But like, so I try to like let them like, okay, express yourself and let's do that. And then like we look at Poe a little bit, another example, and be like, okay, what are they doing that we see here that is working? Like obviously there's a very technical aspect of it, right? You gotta understand narrative voice, you gotta understand like scope, you gotta understand focalization. But I also want to see, if somebody, and I had this, I have students who are into horror, like really, okay, let's see what are the staples of horror and how can we play with them. I have students who are into fantasy, same thing. Let's look at what are the staples of fantasy, right? I had one who was into sports. Okay, so let's look at what can we work with that. But it's just about them. Like it's a chance for them to write and to hear voices, right? And to hear a weirdo like me, like just like give you like weird like advice, right? But mostly it's like for them to be like, I do believe in effort a lot. I am very like, that's my conservative side. I'm very much about effort and
Right.
discipline. So I'm like, let's, do write whatever you want, just like work hard at it and like make sure that you are like, looking at every angle and yeah. So that's kind of, but it's gonna be always a little like of a jazz improvisation depending on
Of
what
course.
they're
Yeah.
interested in.
But just them learning, yeah, just having that, learning that voice, and there's what you outline, many technical things that they need to understand in order to be truly creative.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, someone graduating with an English major or
Mhm.
comparative literature major, what would be your advice for that young person today in
My
terms of
God.
leaving?
That's a very good question. It depends. I mean, I used to be like, we're all mimetic creatures, right? So we kind of like, even if you don't want to, you kind of put yourself into people that are close to you, your students and so on, right? So it's very easy for professors to be like, well, if you're good in French, you can be me, like do what I did, right? And I learned very quickly that that's not a good idea. Like you gotta be careful with that. Sometimes, like we had a student, she's finishing her PhD at Buffalo right now, who was really good at French, and like me and the other faculty member at the time, we believed that she should do a PhD, and we encouraged it. But I have students who came like, I want to do what you. I had students who came like, I want to do what you do, and I had to really clearly specify to this person like what I did, and at the end, like thankfully he didn't do it. Um, or not anything related to that. But uh, I don't know. I think like if you love literature, like if you really like if you're into the creative writing path, right? I would say yeah, do an MFA. Like it, maybe take a time before, but I think it is like I wasn't trying to trash them as like they're horrible. No, I think it's a great experience. I think it's good that there is some support to do that. Um, so that is a path that I would recommend if you are into creative writing. If you are into English more as an analyst and a theory person or like me, a scholar, then do a PhD for sure. Like it's a master's and a PhD. Bearing in mind that anti-intellectual thing that I said, and that is gonna be a rough. Like, like I always tell students, like, if you are willing to go and do a PhD, right? And like knowing that the chances that you get an academic job at the end are like 3%. And that you will have to get like an alternative. Like, but you are going to enjoy 6 years or 5 years of reading stuff and talking ideas, and like it's gonna make you happy. Then by all means do it, and you will learn other skills that probably you can use in something else, right? But I think, and you are obviously more an expert on this than I am completely, but like I think, you know, I've heard, and there's data. I talked with Dr. Bill about it, like how much people with liberal arts degrees get, like, if you want to make money immediately, like study welding, and you will get your job right immediately. But then in the long run, like probably somebody who got a liberal arts degree will like pass you later, right? So I think, like, as I understand it, like if if doing an English degree or a comparative degree, it's just gonna give you that critical thinking about how to read the world that will be really useful in many like realms, right? Like media, human resources, like
Be a lawyer.
could be a lawyer, straightforward, right?
Lawyer, market, all kind of areas of marketing, advertising, a
Yeah.
lot of creative fields.
If you learn another language, international relations, like you could like move on to the. Some people want to. I was meeting some friends in Denmark 2 weeks ago, and like I was talking about like they weren't there, but they were mentioning about Americans who work there in Europe, and he's like, yeah, you can do it. Like you learn the language and you can go and do that. So that opens it a lot, right? But I think what I will say that is more important for me is that I think in the era of the internet and of not the internet that like you and me got to know like decades ago when we were like chat room and this is fun, right?
Yeah, little dial up and wait.
Exactly, yeah. But the one that we live now with these like bubbles of like different worldviews that are completely, the after January 6th kind of like situation, right? We need more than ever the ability to be able to read correctly the world, right? And to distinguish like when we are being manipulated and when we are being like not only because of like AI and things like that, but like just to understand like ideologies and like how the media creates these like hate circles. Like and I think like an English or a literature major is the best thing to like be like, yeah, man, like understand, when you are being manipulated because of your gender, because of your race, because of like, whatever it is that is like, making you, um, you know, like we all live on ideology. Like we all, and by that I mean we all follow things that we don't understand completely,
Mhm.
right? Like, but that are part of ourselves, right? And we work through our lives, as you said with your daughter, right? Like at the beginning, you obviously had no, like
Yeah.
a prejudgment against tattoos, right? But you grow through it, and you're like you understand. Oh, I learned and I understood that she wanted to express herself, right? That's a more or less like innocent one. But there are other ones that are like not that innocent that we go through. Um, and that kind of like I don't think like anything but literature and the arts, right, in general, are like they are the best medium for us to like grow in that sense that takes us beyond what we'll call Heidegger will call like the technical way of being, right? Like the practical, like I need to do this, which never is not in perspective,
Right.
right? So I think, yeah, I think in terms of career, like a bachelor's is still kind of the beginning. So like from there, it depends what they do later. But I think that it gives them, if you do English or anything humanities related, it does give you this like great base to have an open mind, right? That if you just take to your BA as a technical thing where you're just gonna learn how to like mix compounds or how to do something that is absolutely you know uh, um, non-human, right? Like non-humanistic. I think that's scary. I think that's what creates blindness in people. That then they, in my classes sometimes I talk to students and I try to we talk obviously about religion and things like that. And then when I'm like, okay, let's distinguish between like Catholicism and like Protestantism, and I see sometimes like this lack of knowledge of that, and I'm like, how could you think so hard on something if you don't investigate it correctly, right? So, yeah, that would be. But you're more like the career expert.
Well, and the thing that I never want is to turn Lyon into a trade school.
Yeah.
Where my sole focus is landing students jobs, and because then it really, I mean, they will find careers. And the interesting thing in doing this podcast, we've talked to professors in a variety of majors. uh, Archaeology, anthropology is two that come to mind that have meaningful career opportunities there, much like those that
Yeah.
major in English. So it's not that I want everybody that come to Lyon to either be a computer science, biology, or a business major.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
so
yeah.
much more in the world and so much more
Yeah.
opportunity, and then they can now follow something that they're going to be good
Yeah.
at, they're going to enjoy, that they can make life
Mm-hmm.
out of. So it's
Yeah.
that's what we all hope.
Yeah, and I think like to you answer again, or I'll give you like another like thing about with the English majors, right? Like what you're creating is somebody who focuses on language, right?
Mm-hmm.
And language, like the famous logo, like that's kind of what guides us all of our interactions, right? So the more you know about it, and you know how to use it and how it's using you, right? I think the better. So, and yes, the careers are like infinite in that sense, right? Then it depends what you want to do, like a little bit, like if you. I have a friend who went into like sports, like media, right? I have people who have gone into um like marketing and so
Right.
on, like or politics, right? Like please, like as this is my my plea to side. I'm not a citizen yet, but like I tell all my friends who are citizens, like please, like if you can run for something, like like serve in politics because we need it. Like otherwise, just the worst people do it, and it's very scary, right? But that's bad. Like like trying to help or find like nonprofits, right?
Right.
Like there's 1,000 things you can do, especially in a country that is as rich as this one. And especially in a country that also needs a lot of help, like to understand and question things and like, why is the richest country on earth and we have so much poverty? Like it's solvable. Like, right? Like we just need to like think outside of the box in that.
Absolutely. Gavin, any last questions?
No, not really. Sound like you hit everything right
All
on the head.
Well, I have one.
Yeah, sure.
It's a big one.
Okay.
Dramatic pause. All right. You're getting your PhD in South Bend.
Mhm.
How many times did you refer to the school as Notre Dame versus Notre Dame as a French scholar? I imagine that every day. You were you walking around in clenched fists?
Yeah, that's just really funny because where was it? 2 days ago or 3 days ago, I don't know where I was, and somebody referring to the cathedral. Somebody said, "Yeah, the Cathedral of Notre Dame," and I was like,
Well, doesn't it have touchdown Jesus in front of it?
God.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. No, but they were not talking about that one. That was the funny thing, right? Yeah, I think now I just do it because of to distinguish it. Like, what
Of
are you talking
course,
about, right?
yeah.
Not Notre Notre Dame. But for a long time, yeah, I will. Like, it was I'm grateful up to a point, but that is a tricky institution.
Yeah.
It's and I do not like his president at all.
Yeah.
But that's like for another
That's
story.
another podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, with that, Dr. James Martell, thank you for being on the Career
Thank you,
Pathways
guys.
podcast.
Thank you. It was very fun.
This broadcast is sponsored in part by Lyon College and by Kilt Studios.